of the D's and F's in education. We know by 11th grade, boys on average are reading at an 8th grade level compared to girls. So just kind of being a little bit mindful. This really comes into play when I work with a young guy and he's got an older sister. And a lot of times the parents, as well-intentioned as they are, don't want to compare the two, but if academically, behaviorally, and self-directed, it's night and day, the parent struggles, and oftentimes the kid gets that message too. Like, I'm the black sheep. My older sister does everything right, I can't do anything right, versus recognizing, hey, it's not really about you. This is what we call genetics. This is just kind of some of the ways that gender is different. So let's talk about expectations. And what have been the expectations for your kids up to this point? Because again, if we're about to shake the status quo, you can anticipate pushback, right? But I want you to start thinking about your kid up to this point. What is the expectation that you've had either for grades or studying or extracurricular activities or chores? And if there were chores, was there a monetary reward, or was it simply this is how you contribute to the household? What were some of the things that maybe weren't chores, but things that they would do for you? They would bring maybe their laundry and dirty clothes to the laundry room versus you go and get it and you wash it and then you fold it and then you put it back. What were the expectations? The less expectations you had, the further behind they are. Maybe not academically, maybe they fit the model as a family, but if we're transitioning into, we're starting this independent young adult life, how much do they do on their own? So what have they demonstrated a little bit of autonomy already for, and what have they either completely relied on you for, or over-relied on you to do, or it's never even crossed anyone's mind that, well, mom or dad will just always do that. When I was probably in about 5th grade, I played year-round soccer, grew up in Washington State, would have tournaments, very wet, very muddy, always wanted to look suave and cool, right, to go with my cool, suave haircut that I did in the 5th grade. And one day I said to my mom, I said, Mom, my jersey is just muddy and wet, I want to look really nice and neat. She said, well, let me show you how to use the laundry machine. So she showed me how to use the washer, and she kind of identified, well, don't just do this, go get other, colors and whites versus darks and cold water and things along those. She said, now, do you know how to use that? I was like, yeah. She said, great. Let me show you how to use the dryer. I said, okay. So she showed me how to use the dryer. And don't put it on the sheets, kind of always cotton. And it's better to have it do less because you can always add more versus if you run it too long, get hot. She said, do you know how to do that? I said, yes. She said, great. I'm never doing your laundry ever again. And she never did. She never did. The other thing that my mom did one time, I was like, Mom, I need my shirt ironed. She said, well, let me show you how to use the iron. And guess what she said after that? The other thing that happened, this was not so much a teaching moment as it was like punishment, is that for the longest time, I came from a broken home, and I was the only boy for a long period of time, and I got in the bad habit of leaving the seat up. And so what my mom did one night around 3 in the morning, dragged me out of my bed, showed me that the seat was left up, and I had to clean the toilet, clean the rim, put it down. She said, every time you leave the toilet seat up, in the middle of the night, I'm going to get you up, and you're going to clean it. And so I've been married 17 years. I think my wife said twice I've ever left the seat up that entire time. So I don't leave the seat up. I do laundry, and I iron. My wife, I was a big catch for her. But we start to think about, okay, they want the good. They want the freedom, the independence. They want to be able to kind of go into their room, close their door, for you to not know what's going on. Okay, great. Where are they demonstrating maturity? Where are they demonstrating not just the fun freedom, but the responsibility that comes with jumping into this next phase? Now, again, if we're talking about stage appropriate rather than age appropriate, if you're looking at this list and saying, I run around like a chicken with their head cut off, I do all of this for them, we don't want to set them up for failure, which just means that then the goal isn't to do the pendulum swing and go to the extreme way, and now starting next Monday they're going to do all of this. But at some point we have to start to pass the baton. Now, if we pass the baton, remember, if the status quo is going to be shaken up, they're going to push back. We anticipate that. Kids don't say, oh, I'm so glad I have to do more work around the house. I love you, Mom. No, they're going to fight you for it. But the other thing is if we don't ever pass the baton, they're never going to grab it. And if that's the model, sometimes the baton is going to get what? Dropped. And it's better for that to happen when they're in 7th grade or in 8th grade, when they're still at home, and we can catch and guide and teach, and we still have a voice, rather than when they're driving, or when they're 18 and 19 and they're off to college, and we have less of a voice, less of authority, even in the eyes of the law, and then we can even see less once they go away and leave the home. This is the time to start this awkward transition. It can be scary, it can be uncomfortable. More often than not, at the end of the night, my wife and I just look at each other and go, so how'd they talk to you today? How'd they talk to you today? Well, how many eye rolls did you get? But here's what we usually always say too. Did you take the bait? Did you take the bait? Which basically means, did we go down at their level? Because I expect a teen to act like a teen. I expect an adult to act like an adult. That's the hardest thing when we're talking about emotional stuff, right? I just talked about we can't expect a teenager to have reasoning and impulse control like an adult, but I can expect that from an adult. So now, even if you looked at that list and said, what are they doing, what are they not doing? Never thought about them like bringing their clothes or doing their laundry or folding their clothes or whatever that may be. What would you have them do differently if you could do a do-over? Now, we're not here to rewrite history, but that can help inform what are you going to start doing today? Where are we going to start passing the baton? Because most of the problems that this generation of young adults are facing is not academic. It's life skills. It's life skills and their outlook in life and what they feel entitled to and what they believe they're responsible for. And that's the reason why 30% of this talk is the same talk I gave to 11th grade parents a week ago and I gave to college parents in August. Is because the message needs to start happening earlier and earlier, because they're coming into my office after years and years of like, I have a guy at grad school right now, the out of state parent calls them every morning, make sure they're awake, make sure that they get there on time. Do you want that? Are you heading down that direction? You know, what we started doing, and I'll give you an example in my own personal life. Like our daughter, all of her technology, she helps pay for it. But we've also sent the message, just because you pay for it, it's not yours. You're basically leasing it. Because if you don't use it appropriately, we take it. Paid for half her phone, pays for her monthly cost of the data that she uses. Has a tablet, paid for half of it as well. Teaching her skills. In terms of she still has a curfew, she doesn't get to determine it. So when we start to kind of look at, we used to every month, because she'd have to pay, I think it was like pay $25 or something, and my daughter is a teen, which means her favorite pastime is sitting on her butt and doing nothing. And I love her to death, because that's how I was too. But her mother and I we'd get anxious around the 29th or 30th, it's like, has she earned enough money? Like, oh, if she hasn't, like, it's going to be hell next month because she's not going to have the phone. We're going to hear it every day. And we started finding ourselves like a week before, like, you still have this much to earn. And finally we realized, like, we're getting anxious because we know that if we have to follow through, it makes our lives a little less awesome. And we had to say, what are we teaching though? What are we teaching? So we have stopped doing that. She knows exactly what she has to earn. There is a chart where she can track it. We don't say anything until the first of the month, and if she's met it, she gets to keep her phone, and if she hasn't, we get to keep the phone for 2 weeks. And we had to kind of go through that to recognize we set that in place. Can we follow through even if it makes our life a little less comfortable? So, how do we start the autonomies? That's the face you get, right? Because if you're a parent, if we're doing housework and other stuff, it's not like the 40s, advertising where like we're really happy we're doing things. I mean, I read some of those mommy blogs. I know what they're, how they really feel about when they're doing some of this. But how does this start? We do a little bit less for them that we know they can do. They just haven't yet, right? Another one of my mantras is just because you always have doesn't mean you always what? Will, should, have to. And the great thing is that there's a lot of things your kids are capable of, they just haven't had the opportunity, as well as they haven't had the practice. Most of us won't pick up a new skill right away, so they need that little buffer time to do it. So we start doing less for them, but here's the other thing we do, and this is important in middle school and high school, is that this is the opportunity where you can also go a little bit out on the ledge and hand something off to them to see, can they handle it? Can they handle it? We're not entirely sure, but now's the time to kind of see. We did that last year when my oldest was in 7th grade to say, well, can you stay home, by yourself? If your mom and I want to go out, like your younger sister is at a sleepover and she's a picky eater, so like we want to go have Indian food. You're not going to go eat Indian food, and so can we go out and have it? And can you be okay there? And if you need to walk the dog, and if there's a curfew on your technology, and if there's other things, can you do that? Can we trust you to do that when we're away? And we didn't know if she could. So we had to sort of, all of us step out of there, because we were like, yes, if we can have a date night. But we had to see, could she take that on? Or would she exploit that freedom and abuse it? So challenge your kids as well, even if you're not entirely sure, whatever that may be. The next thing we're starting to do is we're starting to where they wake themselves up in the morning. We gave them an alarm. And next year, my high schooler, she's going to start making her lunch for herself. Because there's nothing that infuriates me more, like she comes home and some of the lunch that I made, she didn't eat. I'm like, I got up early to cut those apples that way. So instead of that being one more thing, it's like, okay, fine. Here's the things you can pack in your lunch. It's your lunch. If you don't get up on time, if you don't make your lunch, who's going to suffer? She is. That's what an internal locus of control is. It's this outlook where the quality of my life is based primarily on the choices that I make. That's what we want our kids to have. When I make good, responsible choices, more often than not, my life is pretty darn good. But we want the flip side to be represented as well. When I make poor choices, when I don't manage my time, when I don't figure out a way to remind myself or to study, not just the night before, when I make poor choices, more often than not, there's a poor outcome. That's what we want to build in them. An external locus of control is basically the quality of my life is based upon other people's choices, but I feel entitled to it. So if life stinks, something that the school or my parents or my friends did something wrong. And those people tend to have the most problems and frustration in life. So we want to stretch them. We want to shift more towards direction, self-direction. We consult. We're a sideline person. We're there, and we adjust the boundaries, right? My daughter still has the same restriction and boundary and expectation about her phone, but how we go about it is slightly different. We're not monitoring it anymore. Not at all. And you know what? We're not even monitoring if she goes over the data, because if we go over data, we know it's her, not us. And she's responsible for that, but we don't let her know that. She knows that. Which means if she earns the $25, but the reality is comes the first of the month, she owes us $35 and she doesn't have it, at some point she has to learn, we've made it our responsibility to say, you have to learn that you need to initiate. It's not our job to inform you about every single thing. And that would be an example of how we adjust some boundaries without altogether throwing them away. This is priority number one, because this is how the real world works, right? If you're not respectful with your coach, you're going to get kicked off the team. You're not respectful in a relationship, you're going to break up. You're going to get dumped. You're not respectful at work, you're going to get fired. Most of those people don't really care about your grades. That may be a criteria to be eligible, but very rarely it's like, oh, you're a solid A- student. That's why, I love being around you. So we want to start creating what the real expectation is. It's love and respect. In our household, there's two big non-negotiables. You don't yell and you don't curse. The other is you don't lie. We have a metric of grades of like if it goes below this, we have to have a talk because we know you're more capable, and it actually takes more effort to go below that than it does to actually meet it. But we don't check grades because we've just sort of figured out there's different things that are our priority. Now, for parents, there's a couple ways that we promote that. Number one is we expect that. You'd be surprised how often there's a family in my office where the parents, mom usually is reporting how ugly this kid is to them. And then I ask, well, is he like that with his teachers too? And they're like, no, teachers love him. Okay, well, is he like that with his friends' parents? No, friends' parents, they love him. They can never understand like when I tell them that he's like this. I'm like, okay, well then we got a problem in the household because this kid is able to show respect 90% of the time, and the one place he's not, where it needs to be the starting place, the home, it's where he's his absolute worst. What's going on there? We need to expect and demand it, but we also need to show and give it. When things get really tough and ugly, how much do you as the parent continue to operate with a level of respect? It's quite surprising and alarming how much I come across parents that do name calling with their kids. Now, here's one of my areas of specialty is drugs and alcohol. And right now, for those that report by the time they graduate high school that they've drank or smoked marijuana, the average starting age for alcohol is 11 for boys and 13 for girls. And for those that report that they've smoked marijuana by the time they graduate high school, the average age is 14. So by the time they go to high school, 28% of 8th graders have been drunk within 30 days of any time that the self-reports are assessed. More and more, this is starting early, but this is kind of consistent on a number of levels. One is accessibility and availability, but two, if puberty and that risk-taking and that impulsivity is starting to happen a little bit earlier, we're seeing that happening more and more as well. So we need to keep talking about that and have that be a part of the conversation. As they become adolescents and teens, it's like, well, how do I connect with them? How do I communicate with them? Well, one of the things, this is really hard for some of us parents, is we talk less. We listen more. Listen to what's going on with them. Are you a safe place for your kid to connect and talk and ask questions? So we listen better, we talk less, and then we validate well. And validate well is really important. Does your kid have the perception, regardless of how realistic it is, of like when I talk to my parents, all I hear about is like, what am I doing and what I'm doing wrong? Versus, how are you doing? And what's going on with friends or other areas? Or even as a parent, let me tell you about what's going on with me. It's really important, that validation piece, especially because communication is already going to change and fluctuate during this time. We have to adapt. Catch them doing right things. I mean, think about it. If mental health and psychology is becoming more prevalent, people don't come and see me to say, I need to sit down and just tell you all the really great things my kid's doing. They come in and they unload and they dump. And yet, if we step back, the majority of the conflict is really about inconsequential things, right? Do you recall the prompt that I asked you at the very beginning? What was something that in the moment felt so crucial, so intense, and yet later on you can just sort of laugh it off, or it's really not that big of a deal? That's one of the biggest challenges as your kid jumps into this stage, is the emotionality, and do we take the bait? Do we take the bait? I have this great thing in my household because my wife has to have the last word, and our oldest daughter has to have the last word. And so it's very common on any given day, I have a few minutes in between sessions and I'll just check my phone and there'll be a stream of texts from my daughter saying, let me tell you about mom and what she did and stuff like that. And then after another session, I might have a few minutes and I'll look and there's well, did Caitlin talk to you? Well, let me tell you what really happened. But by the time I get home, usually all I'll do is I'll be like, I'm sorry, love you, sorry, love you. Come back home. I come back home and I say, well, tell me what happened. Oh, it was no big deal. It's over now. Yeah, that's true. It's usually over then. The moment the emotion that feels like the most important thing, give them 10 minutes, give them a half an hour, it's absolutely nothing. And that's really where do we make things worse? By taking the bait. Because the other thing we want to do during this time is validate emotions. We want them to say, it's okay to be angry, but you can do it in a controlled way. It's okay to disagree with your parents, but we need to figure out how to do that in a controlled way. It's okay to have conflict with your friends. It's okay to not agree with everything your teachers say, but can we do it in a controlled way? So we validate emotions because we want that to be expansive, but we enforce behaviors. You can be angry, but you can't swear. You can be angry with your sibling, but you can't hit them. You can not agree with your coach, but you're not quitting the team. And so that's one of the ways we start to help navigate emotional vocabulary with them. As well as emotions, a lot of times they need help, especially the boys. They need help attaching it to behaviors. They tend to be a little bit behind in terms of emotional vocabulary. But if you point it to behaviors, a lot of times like, well, you slammed the door. Were you angry? Were you sad? Did you have any reason? And then, are you sad? Well, are you sad at someone or something? And again, we don't want to shield them from consequences, right? This is the opportunity that if they make poor choices, they start to recognize the fruit of their labor. And so parents, oftentimes well-intentioned, and sometimes even administration well-intentioned, will rescue them from poor study habits or not turning stuff in, not being responsible, things along those lines, versus this is a great time, maybe the best time that they have left to kind of learn some of that. This is a diagram about the why. Like, go do this. Why? And what I say is, okay, we'll go do it. And then if you still wonder why, we'll talk about it. Because more often than not, the why is a stall tactic. But if they keep saying why, second time it's like, well, because I said so. And now if you don't do this, now you're actually challenging my authority. And guess what? We're going to have a problem. And more often than not, if it's a real question of doesn't make sense, they'll do it, and then we'll sit down and talk, and we make compromise where it makes sense. Yeah, you're right, that doesn't really make much sense, does it? But when they ask why, the very first time is, tell you what, go do it, then we'll have that talk. Do you really want to sit and talk? And let me explain why. My kids are like, no, I don't. Avoid power struggles, right? That's the whole idea of take the bait. If we know emotionality is going to surge during this time, they're going to act like teens. Are you going to act like adults? Space. That's hard for parents when we take it very personally, or, and you can ask yourself if this fits for you, you have to have the last word. And if you do, that's going to be difficult. But again, if it's really about mundane things, a lot of the conflict and emotionality, it really is just disagreements. But they're figuring out how to do that in a controlled way. A lot of times it's not conflict, and certainly most of it is really not about we need to step in and enforce or add consequences. This is actually quite important for fathers, because this is the message a lot of times kids, both boys and girls, have, is that their fathers don't ever say they're sorry. And guys sometimes have some challenges of like, how does that not undercut my authority when I say I'm wrong? Now, here's one of the final things I really want to highlight. When we step back, if you recognize, well, my kid is not great in some of these areas, that's when we add more adults and become a partnership. Because we're not here to have our kid fail, but sometimes we're just recognizing the more the parent does, the less effective it really is going to be long term. So if your kid is struggling academically, keeping on top of things, well then maybe we need to set up some tutoring or a life coach or a study coach. But if mom is checking their grades and checking their binders and checking what they got and communicating with their teachers, at some point, that's really mom is